this stuff out of the way. Why is it not saying recording? There we go. Okay, so Matthew, start a whole new 3-year journey here through Matthew. That was supposed to be humorous.
We know it's the truth.
All right, let's see. So to begin with, I actually want to, at the end of Malachi, there's a little piece I left off, which was kind of what happens in between the Testaments, what happens at the end of Malachi before we get into Matthew. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of that, just a couple of things. Because we have, in my Bible, you turn one page and you go from Malachi to Matthew, but you just passed over 400 years of history. So I wanted to fill in a little bit of the blank there. At 400 years is a long time. First of all, the United States has been around 250 or so years, right? 400 years is a really long time to have no word from the Lord. So what happened during that time? So when we left the Israelites, they were kind of under the rule of the Medo-Persians during that time. Very soon after, Alexander the Great comes through, right? We get the Greeks kind of taking over the world. So Greek culture, Greek language kind of is very persistent then throughout the area. And as you know, the Bible is actually written in Greek, right? That kind of shows the influence of the Greek culture on the Israelites. They began with kind of a relatively mild rule, but then after Alexander died and it was turned over to other folks, the Ptolemies, the Seleucids, etc. They kept getting kind of worse and worse towards the Israelites. At one point, they ransacked the temple and put up a statue of Zeus inside the temple for them to worship, etc. So then, I know some of you know about the Maccabean revolt that happened during that time. It was a direct result against what was going on with the Greeks. And so during that time, actually, there was kind of a minor independence of Israel from a foreign occupation. They kind of held their own for a bit, frankly, until the Romans came, and then it was all over again, right? The Romans came around 60 BC, and they again put them in this kind of vassal state. So then, we've got Rome's control. You got kind of Caesar Augustus, who was Julius Caesar's son during Jesus's birth. We hear about him. During Jesus' ministry, we've got Tiberius. During the book of Acts and the disciples, you've got Nero. So you've got all these Roman emperors. You also have Roman governors. You got Pontius Pilate, Felix, Festus, right, that we hear about in the New Testament, all kind of governors that Rome has put in place. Then you also have Herod, who is actually a Jewish leader that again simply responds to Rome, but he is a Jew and not a Roman governor put in place. So you've got all this kind of Roman occupation that we read about as we go through the New Testament. The other thing that went on, another important thing that went on during this intertestament time, if you remember at the end of the book of Malachi, one of the things we focused on is that he said to them, hey, go back and focus your attention on the law. Make sure you understand the law. Make sure you understand what God wants from you. And unfortunately, the Israelites during this 400 years of nothing better to do decided, hey, let's take that law and let's add to it. Let's add a bunch of rules and regulations and additional laws. And so during this 400-year period, really all of the additional add-ons to Jewish thought was really that's really when it happened. So a lot of things that we read about when we get into the New Testament, and it kind of pushes back against the scribes and the Pharisees who have all these itsy-bitsy laws that they have added on, that all kind of occurred during this intertestament period. They just kind of reinterpreted the law to their own benefit. So that's really all I wanted to say about kind of this intertestament period. But I guess the only other thing is that ideas around the Messiah also got a little weird during the intertestament period. They again added some additional things about what he should do, what he should be, just upon not that there was any new revelation from God, just they added stuff on, and so we push back against some of that stuff in the New Testament. So, all right, so that's the intertestament period. So let's get on into Matthew chapter 1. Now, before we actually get into the verses, I want to get a little bit of background on this book and what it's trying to do, and Matthew himself. The main thing to recognize is that this book is written to the Jews by a Jew. The emphasis is on the royalty of Jesus, on the kingship of Jesus. You hear about his royal colors. The genealogy here is all about his royal line. You see here the gifts from the kings, right? He talks about the kingdom at hand over and over again throughout this Bible. It's all about the kingdom, the king that's revealed, the king that's rejected, the king that's going to return. Right? All of that is here in Matthew. It really refers to the Old Testament a lot, again, because it's written to Jews. It's trying to convince them that it's fulfillment of the Old Testament. It's the proof that he's the Messiah. The line, if you look at chapter 1, verse 22, just for a minute, 122 says, "So all this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, etc., etc." That phrase, that it was fulfilled what the Lord has spoken to the prophets, is repeated over and over in Matthew. So again, he refers back to the Old Testament, saying this is a fulfillment of what the prophets have said. So we'll see that over and over again, as again they're trying to convince these Jews that this is the Messiah and they ought to listen to this gospel. The other thing going on at this time, as I said, during this Roman rule, they had a crushing tax system that was in place. The people were overtaxed, and the problem was that at each level that the taxation was passed down, everybody took an additional cut. So you had Rome taking a cut, then you had the governor taking a cut, then you had these tax collectors or publicans that went out and actually took the taxes. They actually took their own cut, and so they got very rich. They were typically Jews that decided to work for Rome to collect the taxes. So they were very much hated by the other Jews. They were listed on a list of people right next to dogs, which in the Jewish mindset was the lowest of the low. Bless you. So you got you got these tax collectors. So of course, as we know, Matthew is one of those. And by the way, the early church all agreed that this book is written by Matthew, the disciple. In recent years, some of that has been questioned, but historically, it's always been pretty locked down that this was written by Matthew. I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 9, where Matthew actually talks about himself. Matthew chapter 9, verse 9. So Matthew 9:9, mine says, "As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax office, and he said to him, 'Follow me.' And so he arose and followed him." That's really all we know about the call. There's a little bit more detail in the following verses, but that's really all we know about the call. He said, "Follow me," and he arose and followed him. I mean, it's a pretty amazing response, right? And we see this with the other disciples as well. But here you have Matthew, who was in a pretty lucrative, I was going to say ludicrous, a pretty lucrative position as a tax collector. He was living in a good house. He was getting all the money he needed. And all of a sudden, he just gets up and leaves it all. He leaves all of his, I guess you would call them business associates, right? Because he has no friends because everybody hates him because he's doing this job. But he leaves all of his possessions, very probably, leaves all of his world behind in order to follow Jesus. It's a pretty amazing response to Jesus's call. And every time we read something like this, it should also be a challenge to us, right? To see the things that Matthew gave up in order to follow Christ, compared to what we have given up to follow Christ is pretty minimal. The other thing to recognize is that in Mark and Luke, Matthew is actually referred to as Levi. So I actually want to go, well, first of all, for reference, in Mark 2:14, we're not going to go there. That's where it's also referred to, but we're going to go to Luke chapter 5 and look at this, look at what he says there in Luke chapter 5, verse 27. In the wrong book, and I'm wondering why it doesn't look right. Luke 5:27. That looks better. All right, so again, we see a very similar statement. After these things, he went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax office, and he said to him, "Follow me." So again, all the commentaries agree this is the same person. This is Matthew, called Levi in Luke and Mark. There's no real good explanation as why he's called Levi in one place and Matthew another. Could be that he's from the family of Levi, but it's just kind of unclear. Let's keep going in Luke, verse 28. So he left all, rose up, and followed him. That's what we also saw in Matthew. But I want to keep going here to the next piece. Matthew has the same information, but Luke has a little bit more detail here in verse 29. So then Levi gave him a great feast in his own house, and there were a great number of tax collectors and others who sat down with them. And their scribes and the Pharisees complained against his disciples, saying, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus answered and said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." We're going to get into the rest of these verses when we get into Matthew later on, but I did want to just point out in verse 29, Levi gets called by God. He's called by Jesus to follow him. He immediately leaves everything and follows him. But the very next thing that he does is he has a party. He has a party, he has a feast, and he invites all of his old friends in to meet Jesus, right? It is his first reaction is, you all need to hear about this guy also. You need to hear about this Jesus. I just think it's a great testimony. You don't hear a lot about what Matthew did in other parts of Scripture. He is one of the disciples. Whenever it says the disciples did this or Jesus said this to the disciples, Matthew was there. But you don't hear anything specifically about what Matthew did. But here, right in the beginning of his ministry, you certainly see his heart when he holds this feast right after he is saved. He invites in all of his friends and says, "You need to hear about this Jesus," and he hosts them at his house and has this kind of conversation. So again, it's a challenge to us as we see the obedience that Matthew has and the passion that he has for Jesus in responding with this party of all of his friends. So again, just to say it one more time that Matthew was one of the disciples. He was with the disciples during all of Jesus's miracles, during all of Jesus's teachings. He's at the Last Supper. When Jesus appeared to the disciples after the resurrection, he was there, right? So you just got to recognize as we read through this, Matthew is an eyewitness. He saw it all. He participated in it all, and he is reflecting on his own experiences in his writing here. It is interesting that he's relatively modest, obviously. He always refers to himself in the third person. He talks about Matthew rather than saying, "I did this" or "I was a part of that," which is interesting. As a tax collector, he is relatively literate as compared to this bunch of fishermen. Right, that he's hanging out with now. So him writing this book, kind of makes sense from his educational background. The other thing is, as a tax collector, he would have to know who he's getting the taxes from and who needed to give him taxes. So his knowledge of genealogy, his knowledge of people's names and who they were connected to would be very important to him as a tax collector. So as we'll see here in these verses in front of us, he is the one that then writes down this genealogy because it would be information that he would have, very familiar with. All right, so when we talk about genealogy, the Jews are all about genealogy. They're very tenacious about their pedigrees and where they came from. There's a story when the Jews returned from Babylon and returned back to Israel. There was a whole family that could not prove that they were of Israelite background, and essentially they got thrown out of the land because they did not have their pedigree written down in a state. So I think that's back in Ezra if you ever want to find it. But so this was something very important to them. Certainly, you know that Joseph goes back to Bethlehem, right, in order to which was the place of his pedigree, if you will, when the census was taken, when Jesus was born. I mean, all of that is about the Jews knowing where they're from, knowing their pedigree, etc. You'll remember that in Romans, we saw Paul kind of listing off his heritage, right? I am from Abraham. I am from, I am one of those people, right? He knows his pedigree. So again, it's just something very, very important to the Jews is to know their pedigree, know their genealogy. The other thing I just want to show you, go to Matthew chapter 13. Matthew 13, verse 54. Matthew 13:54. Here we have in the middle of Jesus's ministry, Matthew 13:54. Mine says, when he had come to his own country, he taught them in their synagogue so that they were astonished and said, where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works? Is this not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas, and his sisters, are they not all with us? Where then did this man get all these things? And so they were offended at him. But Jesus said, a prophet is not without honor in his own country, etc. Right? But what's interesting is they're offended by his genealogy. They knew his genealogy. They knew who his dad was. They knew who his mom was. They knew the situation between his mom and Joseph, right? They had all that. In fact, go to the Gospel of John now and look at chapter 7. In John 7, verse 27. Verse 27 again, it says, however, we know where this man is from, but when the Christ comes, no one knows where he is from. So again, they're saying they know this guy, they know his mom, they know his dad. Skip down to verse 40. Verse 40 says, therefore many in the crowd, when they heard this saying, said, truly this is the prophet. Others said, this is the Christ. But some said, will Christ come out of Galilee? Has not the scriptures said that the Christ comes from the seed of David and from the town of Bethlehem where David was? And so there was a division among the people because of him. Some wanted to take him, et cetera, et cetera. So again, a couple things here. One, they knew him, they knew his background, they knew he came from Galilee, but also they knew that the Christ was supposed to come from the seed of David and from the town of Bethlehem, right? Those are very clear in here. And again, they're offended by him teaching in such a way because he's obviously not the Christ because he doesn't come from Bethlehem. Of course, we know the story there. Skip over to John chapter 8, verse 41. Here we have Abraham kind of confronting the Pharisees. So just go right to it. In verse 41, it says, you do the deeds of your father. So here Jesus is talking to the Pharisees saying, you do the deeds of your father, implicating that their father is Satan and not Abraham. And then they respond, then they said to him, we were not born of fornication. We have one Father who is God. So here they're actually throwing back Jesus's parentage back in his face, saying, well, Mary obviously was, had you through fornication, right? Because you and Mary and Joseph were not married, and she had a child, so obviously you are a child of fornication. I mean, that's a real smack right in Jesus's face, right? So my point is that they had this the idea of pedigree, the idea of background was critically important to them, and actually it was something that was that they mocked Jesus about during his ministry, that he didn't have the pedigree. So this is why Matthew here really takes the time to walk through Jesus's pedigree, to walk through where does he come from, what is his background, really trying again to prove that he is the Christ, that he is the Messiah, that he checks all the boxes that are required in order to do that. By the way, just as a little aside, today there is no record of tribal registry for the current Jews. All of that was lost in history. There's no Jew today that says, I can show you how I am related back to David, or I can show you how I'm related back to Abraham. All of their tribal records were lost over time. So what's interesting there is, right, there's no one who could come forward and say, hey, I am the Messiah and I can show you my tribal record, because there's no Jew who has that information today. So those Jews who are still waiting on the Messiah are going to wait a really long time until, frankly, the real one comes again. But that's just an aside. Now, the other thing we've got to deal with here is that the genealogy that we have here in Matthew is different from the genealogy that is in Luke, right? Luke has one in Luke chapter 3. They're not exactly the same. There are different people in the line. Does anybody know why that is?
I read somewhere that Matthew skipped about 14 generations.
Not quite right, but I'll get to that. But what's the main difference between the two? Anybody else know?
Isn't one of them Joseph's and one of them Mary's?
Exactly. So that's the key thing. This one here in Matthew is Joseph's genealogy. The one in Luke is Mary's genealogy. Both of them come from Abraham. Both of them come from David, but they go through different pathways in order to get to Joseph and Mary. Again, Matthew is focused on the royalty of Christ. So he follows Joseph's kingly pedigree, right? He follows the royal line. Mary is the bloodline, okay? That comes to Christ, because it's her blood that's in Christ, not Joseph's blood. It's the royal, the ability to reign, the ability to be said as king that comes through him being associated with Joseph, having Joseph as his, quote, father. So that's the really important difference between these two. Matthew showing the royal descent, Luke shows us the bloodline, both of them through the line of David, the seed through Mary, the heirship of David through Joseph. And Walt, we'll get to your point a little bit later. There is something there about the 14 that we need to talk about.
Is it possible in Luke, some of the difference too is because Luke probably got a lot of his material from Mary? I mean, it looks like, in Luke, it looks almost like an interview from Mary's perspective on a lot of events.
It could be. I mean, it certainly, I would say this again, that the Jews were crazy about their pedigree and their genealogy. So they would all know that, right? So Mary would know hers, Joseph would know his, right? And they would be able to share that with whomever. It could very well be that Luke got it directly from Mary, sure. All right, now let's actually get finally into the verses, if we could. That was all introduction. So I want to read through all the way through verse 17, just to kind of give you the scope of this. I want you to, as we go through it, let your mind get tickled by some of the names that are in there, that you go, gee, that's an interesting name to be in here, okay? Because we're going to pause as we go back to it. All right. So the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac, Isaac begot Jacob, Jacob begot Judah and his brothers. Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez begot Hezron, and Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Abinadab, whatever the guy's name is. Anadab begot Nashon. Nashon begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz by Rahab. Boaz begot Obed by Ruth. Obed begot Jesse. Jesse begot David the king. David the king begot Solomon by her who had been the wife of Uriah. Solomon begot Rehoboam. Rehoboam begot Abijah. Abijah begot Asa. Asa begot Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat begot Joram. Joram begot Uzziah. Uzziah begot Jotham. Jotham begot Ahaz. Ahaz begot Hezekiah. Hezekiah begot Manasseh. Manasseh begot Amon. Amon begot Josiah. Josiah begot Jeconiah and his brothers about the time they were carried away to Babylon. And after they were brought to Babylon, Jeconiah begot Shealtiel, and Shealtiel begot Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel begot Abiud. Abiud begot Eliakim. Eliakim begot Azar. Azar begot Zadok. I love that name, by the way, Zadok. Zadok begot Achim. Achim begot Eluid. Eluid begot Eleazar. Eleazar begot Matthian. Matthian begot Jacob. Jacob begot Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called the Christ. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. Until the captivity in Babylon are 14 generations, and from the captivity of Babylon until Christ are 14 generations. All right, so that's the listing of the genealogy. Now I actually want to kind of go through it more slowly and pick out some of the names that are in there that are very interesting. That these names are in the genealogy of Christ. So first of all, it's the genealogy of Jesus Christ. This is a really important point. So I want to make sure you get this right up front. This Christianity is the story about a person. It's not just a philosophy or a teaching. It's the history of a person and what that person did. He's a real person. On a given date, this birth did happen. Take away the person of Jesus and you have no Christianity, right? It's not just a body of truth. It's not just a great philosophy of how we should live our lives, right? It's the story of a person. This is the genealogy of Jesus Christ. There's a story about missionaries who went into the jungle and were translating Matthew into their people's own language. And they kind of skipped over this genealogy stuff. Not important, the genealogy stuff. They kind of started after that, kind of translated the Bible, gave it to the people, were teaching it to them. And then later on, they came back and actually translated the genealogy back into these people language and gave them kind of an updated Bible. And when the people saw this, the response was, oh, this is a real person? This is a real individual? This is not just somebody that you've just made up. This is not just some idea, right? I think we kind of have heard it so often we don't get the importance that this was a real person, right? This was a real person who was in history and had a real genealogy. So having that genealogy is important just from the, hey, this is a real person. All right. Notice also Matthew, very clearly says this is Jesus Christ. Now that's not his name. That's his title, right? His name is Jesus, but Christ is a title. It is the title used for Messiah. It really is the word Christ means chosen one. So Matthew right out of the gate is saying this is the Christ. This is the genealogy of Jesus, who is the Christ, and I'm going to show you why that is true, right? And we have seen, in Scripture. If you need a reference in John 1:41, when the disciples met Jesus, they came back and they said to the people, "We have found the Messiah." Right? They recognized right up front. And for those of you who remember, when we go back to Daniel chapter 9, verse 25, we won't look at it today, but Daniel there talks about the coming Messiah. So we have kind of bookend, here now that Messiah that Daniel talked about is coming. The other thing just to recognize here about this Jesus is, sometimes in history, somebody shows up and has a great impact upon history. Just take Adolf Hitler, right? He shows up, he takes over Germany, he essentially instigates the wars, right? Blah, 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 blah. Big impact upon history. Jesus, however, doesn't just show up, right? He's been predicted for thousands of years. The prophets have been telling that he's going to come. It's not just some random, unforeseen person who's just a big surprise that he comes on the scene. Jesus has been predicted. He's part of God's redemptive purpose all the way from the beginning. It's the fulfillment of God's plan, right? So again, that's an important thing to recognize right here. And I love the phrase in Galatians 4 where it says, when the fullness of time came, God sent his son, right? When the fullness of time came, Jesus is the fulfillment of that promise. So don't miss that in this either, right? He's not just a random person that just showed up on the scene, and he is a real person. All right. We're still in verse 1. So he says right up front also, Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Again, he's trying to get the Jews to understand this is the Messiah by going back to these two key people in their history. So I do want you to go back to Genesis chapter 22. We're going to do these two people backwards. Excuse me. We'll talk about Abraham first and then David. So Genesis chapter 22. Just to show you the story. Genesis 22:15. I'm sorry. Genesis 22:15. So here mine says, then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time out of heaven, and he said, by myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this thing. So this thing is Abraham bringing his son up to the mountain to sacrifice him, and God stopping him, right? Because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son, blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your descendants shall possess the gate of your enemies. In your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So that last phrase really is the key phrase. All the nations of the earth shall be blessed because you have obeyed my voice. So the blessing, the God's plan for Abraham was to bless all of the nations through him, right? And that really is the plan of salvation. The salvation plan was to come through Abraham, and that's the blessing that was given to him. I do want you to turn to Galatians chapter 3. I know we were just there in our heads, but I need you to actually look at it now. Galatians chapter 3. This is a great piece here. Galatians 3, verse 16. Because here in Galatians, Paul talks about that promise that was made to Abraham. So Galatians 3:16 says, now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He does not say, and to seeds as of many, but as of one, and to your seed who is Christ. So here Paul is giving us clarity on what we've just read back in Genesis. When God said to Abraham, through your seed, the nations will be blessed. What Paul is saying, he was saying your seed is not all of your descendants. Your seed is one person. Your singular seed. It's a singular word, and that seed is Christ. So again, the promise given to Abraham was Christ. And so when Matthew starts saying that he is a son of Abraham, he's saying he is the fulfillment of that promise. He's the fulfillment of the promise that was made to Abraham that all the nations would be blessed, and they would be blessed through Christ. All right, hold on a second.
They're all gone over there.
Yep. Okay, sorry. Little personal problem here. All right, now we go on to the son of David. Now, So we have the promise that was given to Abraham. Hold on a second. I have a little nose problem to take care of. Okay, I feel better now.
Yeah,
All right.
that didn't sound so little.
I guess I should have muted it, right?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. All right, go to 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel chapter 7. If you can't find that, it comes right after 1 Samuel. 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12. 2 Samuel, taking that in the wrong place. 2 Samuel 12, 7. 2 Samuel 7, verse 12. 2 Samuel 7, verse 12. Ignore what I say, just do what I think. All right, 2 Samuel 7, 12. God is talking to David here. It says, when your days are fulfilled and you rest with your fathers, I will set up your seed after you, who will come from your body, and I will establish the kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he shall be my son. If he commits iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and the blows of the sons of men. But my mercy shall not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I removed from before you. And your house and your kingdom shall be established forever before you. Your throne shall be established forever. If you notice, the word forever is listed there 3 times, right? God is making a promise here to David that the promise made to Abraham is going to continue through David, and that is going to be a forever continuation. That the seed of Abraham is going to reign forever, right? So for those of you who went through Revelation with us, this is exactly what he's talking about, right? He's saying that the seed of Abraham, Christ, is going to reign forever, and that's in the eternal kingdom. That promise there, and all of that is going to come from Abraham through David. So this is again why it's so critically important that that the Jews believe and understand that Christ, that Jesus came through this line, because they believe that this forever kingdom is got to come through David. All right. The other thing, just to point out, is that this phrase, the Son of David, is used in Matthew more than anyone else. Again, he's trying to show this is the Son of David. You remember when the demons cry out, they cry out to the Son of David. I mean, that phrase is used over and over in Matthew. The other thing just to point out, just right on top, is that notice that it says the Son of Abraham, the Son of David. They're pointing out the uniqueness of this person. It is the Son of Abraham, the Son of David, not one of the sons of Abraham and not one of the sons of David. This is the one. This is the one that you've been looking for. Now, before we go on, a very important thing I got to say up front here is David and Abraham were both sinners, right? I don't have to convince you of that. You know their stories, right? You know what Abraham did and giving up his wife and saying that he was his sister and all that. And you certainly know what David did with regard to Bathsheba, etc. Both of them are sinners, but they are critical in the bloodline of Christ. They are critical in showing that he is the Messiah. I'm going to come back to that point later. So just want to say it up front. All right, so let's get back to the list and see who else we run into, okay? So verse 2, Abraham begot Isaac, Isaac begot Jacob, Jacob begot Judah and his brothers. So we know all of those stories about Isaac and Jacob and Judah and his brothers, right? We've heard those over and over. I'm not going to go back into those. I'm going to pull out some stories here that you may not know. So let's go to verse 3. Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez begot Hezron, and Hezron begot Ram. So right in the middle of there, we see Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Do you know the story of Tamar? This is a woman now. This is the first woman that we see in the list. The rest are all men. But we have here that Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Do you know Tamar's story? Anybody?
She was a prostitute, or posed as a prostitute.
She was initially
His daughter-in-law.
his daughter-in-law married to the oldest son, correct?
Correct. That's right.
And then, was there another son before the youngest son was old enough, or no?
Yeah, so it's if you want to go and study it, it's back in Genesis 38. We're not going to go back there and read all of it, but yeah, Judah had a son who was married to Tamar. It said that God found him to be evil and killed him. So then he was given to the next son. She was given to the next son, and God didn't like him and killed him. So then he was given to the next son, but the next son was just a kid. And so we had to wait until he grew up in order to actually father any children with Tamar. Well, Tamar got impatient and decided to pose as a prostitute, and then laid with Judah. And by Judah, then these two children were born. Pizar, whatever it was, I've lost my place.
Perez and Zerah.
Yep, Perez and Hezron.
I don't think Tamar got impatient. Judah did not give his son when he was old enough.
Right, that's right. Judah kind of reneged on his promise to Tamar. Yeah, and so Tamar took it into her own hands.
Yes, and that's when she took his cord, staff and his cord, so she could prove. And then Judah realized he had sinned by not following through on the promise of what he was supposed to do. Yeah.
That's right. So all those details back in Genesis 38, so again, the point here is we have Jesus's bloodline brought through Perez, who was a child of someone who posed as a prostitute. It is just something that you need to recognize right there. So let's keep going. Ram begot Aminadab. Aminadab begot Nahshon. Nahshon begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz by Rahab. All right, now you know who Rahab is, right? Right?
Yes.
We whenever we say Rahab, we always say Rahab the harlot, right? She was the one when the spies came in to look out the land. She was the one who helped the spies, and they looked kindly on her and her family. But also, by the way, she ended up having a child by Salmon. And that child's name is Boaz. So again, here in the midst of this, you have Rahab, a harlot, who is in the bloodline of Christ. All right, and Boaz begot Obed by Ruth. So here's the third woman in this list. Obed begot Jesse. So who is Ruth? We have a whole book on her. I can't hear you.
So he said daughter-in-law of Naomi, a Moabite, and she was married to Naomi's
Sons,
one
both
of
her
her
sons
sons,
died, yeah.
who both
So
died.
she stayed with Naomi.
Right, and they came back
Boaz.
and redeemed her. Yeah, Boaz redeemed her.
Okay, good. So Ruth is a non-Jew, right? She is a Moabite. Where did the Moabite people come from? Do you remember?
Go the daughters of Lot.
Who's talking? I can't hear you.
One of the daughters of Lot.
Yeah, remember the daughters of Lot? They were afraid there were no men who would take them on as husbands, so they got their dad drunk, right? And they had children by their dad, and those children became the Moabites and the Ammonites, right? So the Moabites were essentially children of incest, and so here you have Ruth of that group of Moab. Now Ruth herself, from all accounts, was a wonderful lady, right? From the story that we read about her, but her ancestry, came from incest, being from the Moabites. All right, So we got a fun group so far, don't we? All right, let's keep going. And Jesse begot David the king, and David the king begot Solomon by her who has been the wife of Uriah. I love that they don't even mention her name there, right? And who is that? Who has been the wife of Uriah? Who is that person?
Bathsheba.
Bathsheba.
Yeah, it's Bathsheba, right? So what he's saying there, so again, you have David, as I said earlier, who is a sinner. You have Bathsheba, who has committed fornication, right? She has had a child out of wedlock with David. That child, that child being Solomon, right? So again, this is an interesting group of women that we have here. We got Tamar, who played the prostitute. We got Rahab, who is a prostitute. We got Ruth, who comes from a line of incest, and then we got Bathsheba, who was involved with fornication. I'm just pointing out the women here. The guys are a mess. They're a complete mess. So,
Yeah.
Because Solomon was his son, or second child.
Yeah, the first one
First one
died
died.
because that was adultery, and then he killed Uriah. David did.
right. So let's keep going. Verse 7. What time are we? Oh my. Who's supposed to be watching the clock? Obviously not me. We better stop here in the middle. So we got still some more interesting. Let me just point out a couple of interesting people. One is when it says here, Joram begot Uzziah, you'll find out that that's not exactly correct, and we need to understand what's going on there. And then in verse 11, you have this guy named Jeconiah. There's a whole story around Jeconiah that we need to understand. So if you want to look up some of these, and then we end up with Mary and Joseph, and we're going to talk a lot about them when we get finished. So, but I think we better stop there because we've run late. I apologize for that. So let me give Hugh some time. Let me make sure you get the picture though before you get the big picture. And that is that this bloodline of Christ is a mess, okay, with a bunch of sinners, and it should harden us who are a bunch of sinners that God can still use us, right, in the same way that He used these people in the bloodline of Christ, and we'll talk more about that next week. So, Hugh, for you.
Not here from the side. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I just